It's chaos.
It's a different type of Sunday scary.
It's your newest obsession.
It's Dirty Driving, a Formula One podcast.
We're the Hornsby sisters. I'm Katie.
And I'm Megan.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
And welcome back to another episode of Dirty Driving. This week and pretty much all of the bye weeks, we are going to be deep diving on one team and their drivers to provide you basically the opportunity to get to know them and to decide whether or not you really want to be a fan of them or not.
For our first week, who better than Ferrari? And yes, Katie and I are rocking our new Ferrari swag she got in Monza. I'm feeling a little like, would you like some fries with that Big Mac today?
Or unfortunately, our ice cream maker has already been cleaned for the evening.
Do you need a girl toy or a boy toy with that Happy Meal? Do you need the 4-piece or the 6-piece chicken nuggets with that Mighty Kids meal? Which those are incredible, and I'm so glad that they don't have an actual age limit on them. But back to Ferrari. We are watching them absolutely dominate not only the new season, but the new era as well. I mean, granted, it's been 2 races and 2 testing sessions, but I'm going to call it what it is and celebrate it.
I think we should be celebrating that. It's exciting. And I guess how this is going to work, we'll give you a little prequel into it, is we're going to discuss a little bit about the history, what's going on in 2022, deep dive into the drivers and talk a little bit about their history and how they got to where they are now. And then we'll really wrap up telling you why you should be a fangirl of Ferrari and Charles and Carlos. So yeah, I hope this helps people decide what team they want to root for, or help you at least learn a little bit more about the 10 constructors and 20 drivers on the grid. So Megan, I think we jump right into the history.
Let's do it. So as a former social studies teacher, I feel like I'm inclined to say right now that this is not going to be a full deep dive history on Ferrari. If we were going to do that, Katie and I would probably need about 24 hours of your life. And it would be something along the lines of like Ferrari, the 24-hour Le Mans featuring Megan and Katie. But a very different race, a race to see who would not fall asleep the first. Not that I'm saying that Ferrari's history is boring. It's just very long, and that's truthfully just a testament to their legacy being in the sport the entire time that we've had the World Championship. So this history, I hate to say lesson, but I mean a little history lesson, a little nugget of history, is more just like a part of history that Katie and I have found interesting, something that maybe we haven't learned anything about yet that we just wanted to bring to you. So I kind of picked this one. I didn't pick Ferrari, but I picked what we were going to focus on today because I really didn't know a lot of it. So I think we're going to just dive right into it and talk about the history of Ferrari, the other F word in motorsport. Not fuck. The other F word is Formula One. Jesus, I know what you guys were all thinking. That was a really bad joke. Like, that was that just fell totally flat, and I hope someone laughed.
I laugh for you, so that's at least something.
I thought I was just going to lay it. I just don't think I set it up right.
All right, well, I'll just take it from here, I guess. There have been 15 driver titles in the history of Ferrari. The first was won by Alberto Ascari in 1952, who went back to win again in 1953. He won 2 more in the 1960s, 1956 with Juan Manuel Fangio, 1958 with Mike Hawthorne. So they started off not super consistent, but back then there wasn't much consistency to be found. So following that, we've kind of just seen a couple driver championships throughout the decades. There were 2 in the 1960s, 1961 with American driver Phil Hill, and 1964 with John Surtees. There were 3 in the 1970s, 2 with the esteemed Niki Lauda, and 1 with Jody Scheckter. And then 1980s and 1990s, there was a drought for the Drivers' Championship, so we didn't see any Ferrari drivers win. However, luck changed in the 2000s, which brought 5 back-to-back victories for Michael Schumacher from 2000 to 2004. And then their most recent one with now newly retired Kimi Räikkönen. In those long years of history, we've also seen 16 Constructors' Championships, and the Constructors' Championship was actually not formed until 1958. So they had 2 in the 60s, 4 in the 70s, 2 in the 80s, and then went from 1983 to 1999 to win another one, 6 years before the 6 years in a row that they won from 1999 to 2004. And then we saw 2 more in both 2007 and 2008. They are the most celebrated team. They are the most winning team. They are tied with Formula One to a T. They're tied to the story, the legacy, and the history of the sport. I think one of Megan and I's most favorite quotes that is, somewhat very popular is Enzo Ferrari said, "Ask a child to draw a car and he will most certainly draw it red." So I think when we think of Formula One and we think of Ferrari, we think of red, we think of the Tifosi, and we think about the legacy that Enzo has left in making street cars, which really fueled his true passion of racing and owning a racing team.
It's actually really sad that as much as I revere Enzo Ferrari, I knew essentially nothing about the guy other than the fact that he is the heart and soul of Ferrari until I started, reading about Ferrari over the off season. I actually really hate to admit that. Like really, really, truly, I knew very little beginnings about the Scuderia. Like I actually didn't even know why Italian teams use the term Scuderia. It's a stable for horses. That was something I learned in the off season as well. So it was kind of funny in reading about Ferrari. It's just like, of them, we've read the stories, we've watched the films. Katie and I watched both Rush, which is about Niki Lauda. And then of course we watched the documentary about Michael Schumacher in the off season. But I never actually took the time to look at the beginnings of the Scuderia. So that's what we're talking about today, this little nugget of history class that we're having. So Scuderia Ferrari was, of course, founded by Enzo Ferrari, who was a racing driver and sporting director for Alfa Romeo previously. In the mid 1945s, this is what I was about to say. In 1945, Enzo Ferrari commissioned the design of an innovative car with his goal of beating Alfa Romeo. Before the war, so before World War II, Enzo Ferrari had been a racing driver and then the sporting director at Alfa Romeo, where he had been allowed to race under the name Scuderia Ferrari, but for ultimately Alfa Romeo. So now, post-war, he had separated from Alfa Romeo. He is commissioning his own car with the sole goal of beating Alfa Romeo. I freaking love that.
Yeah, it's kind of reminiscent of Toto Wolff just now recently saying, like, everyone has a target on their back. It's like, yeah, my one sole purpose is to come and dominate against Alfa Romeo.
Hey, you got to have a goal. You got to have a mission. I'm here for it. I love it. I'm all for this, like, single purpose. In all of my reading, it was really interesting to learn that his, like, biggest concern, his hyper focus was about the engine. None of us should be surprised about that because Ferrari is now an engine powerhouse. I mean, they do make, street cars, but street cars are cool. Racing cars are much cooler. Even Enzo thought so. He only made them to make enough money to keep his racing team going. Which, funnily enough, in 1947, they actually is when Ferrari, as everybody outside of Formula One knows it, actually started, and they started making street cars. So without the Scuderia, the racing team, Ferrari would not exist. it was a byproduct of the team, essentially. The logo had already existed and then like had translated into the car. He just used it right over. So in May 11th of that year, they had their racing debut at the Piazza circuit. Katie's probably going to criticize my pronunciation there. They raced 2 cars that day. It was the 125S. The S stood for sport. That was driven by Franco Cortese. And the 125C, which stood for competition. And that driver was supposed to be our favorite guy, Nino Farina, which badass name for an Italian. I also do think that we should bring back 2 different car names for the drivers and name one sport and one competition. That is some second driver energy.
That would definitely shift some teammate relationships, is all I've got to say about that.
Just imagine like the Red Bull controversy a couple years Red Bull infighting between like Max Verstappen and Pierre Gasly.
I was going early.
I was going more
You were
recent.
going earlier. I'm thinking like Mark Webber, Sebastian Vettel, but
I mean, we could go back to that. Hell, we could even go to Max and Daniel. One of them's in the sport and one of them's the competition.
One's in competition. Foul. That would just be foul, honestly.
Foul,
it's foul. But that back then, it was like that too. So
hey, I don't really know if they did it intentionally, but whatever. So in their racing debut, the 110A5S was with Franco Cortese, and the 125C was with Nino Farina, who did not show up to the race because he wanted the 125S. So like, add insult to injury, homeboy just doesn't show up. He's like, I want my teammate's car. You're not giving it to me. I'm out. Why is that like some like Haas type shit from last year? I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. Ultimately, the 125S would retire with a fuel pump failure, but Enzo Ferrari would call it a promising failure. And that right there, I had to include the story in it. One, because of Nino Farina, but because of Enzo Ferrari believing that a failure was in fact translatable to success. And that's something I'm going to talk about later when we talk about, 2022. But I think that belief and that foundation inside of Ferrari is why they have stayed in the competition and why they are so successful, is because even in their rough times, they have found promise in failure in a weird way.
Yeah, it's similar to something that I believe in about like failing fast and failing forward, of like, I'm going to make these mistakes and I'm going to have failures, but what am I going to learn from them? And then what am I going to turn them over and do next? And I think, as you've just said, Ferrari has shown us that for years and years.
Cannot agree more. So later in that year, May 20th of 1947, they would drive the 125S to victory at the Roman Grand Prix. Roman Grand Prix? Don't remember. Don't know which was the correct one. It was the first of 6 victories that year, with a notable win at Parma. So amazing year before Formula One. Started out not so great, but you can see how that that constant vision towards we will be successful allowed them to translate into 6 victories that year. In 1950, the first year of the World Championship, Ferrari took part of the inaugural World Championship. They did not actually race at Silverstone that year. They were forced to withdraw due to a dispute over starting money. So, Ferrari,
ran out of money?
I think, from what I understand, it was a dispute over money internally in the team over having the money. But I just find that funny. Nowadays, imagine, they show up in Bahrain and Ferrari can't start because they didn't have the startup money to do it.
I don't have my starting money. Why'd you come? Who knows?
Hilarious. I think it was a dispute with the drivers. I don't think it was they couldn't afford to race.
Yeah. Okay.
They would debut later at the Monaco Grand Prix of that year. Then at Monza that year, that last final race, which is crazy to talk about like Silverstone, Monaca, Monza in terms of 1950. I had to do it. Luigi Villarossi, which was their second driver, was in a traffic accident prior to the event. However, the organization would not allow their like third car driver, who sometimes raced, Raymond Summers, to fill in. So get this, Katie, they asked a bike racing driver or bike racer. You can't call them bike racing driver, bike racer, Dorino Serafini to race in his place. Serafini raced in his place. When Ascari had to retire his car, Serafini jumped out and gave Ascari his car. Ascari podiums. So technically, Serafini is on the books as the only driver with 100% podium rate. He raced in one race and he got a podium because he shared it with Ascari because they were in the same car.
Wow. That's insane. Imagine like that's your legacy in F1. 100%, baby.
Hey, I'm loving it. Ferrari would not win their first Formula One Grand Prix until the following year, 1951, at the British Grand Prix. So they made their comeback at Silverstone. I don't know. It sounds so dumb, but like these beginning years, which weren't really the beginning years of Ferrari, you know, the Scuderia had raced under Alfa Romeo, but there's something about 1947 and that year and that talking about that year that just, it brought like joy. I don't really know why.
I think like back then, and someone said this, and it really stuck with me, but back then they just showed up because they liked to race. And like still today we show up because we like to race, but there's so much more to it with politics and drama and money and where we're going to race and things that are going on in the world, geopolitics. But back then it's like they just showed up because they loved a good car race on a Sunday. And I love learning more about the history. We also watched the Fangio documentary, and yeah, it was so different back then, but still the same.
They were like wild back then. I just loved how they were all friends. They all hung out together. They all were like smoking cigarettes and drinking and then getting in cars and racing. Hearing about 1947 and like everything that happened, the driver not showing up, then going into 1950 and them just being like, well, we'll find a bike racer. We'll throw him in the car. Like, hopefully this works.
Like, no, I don't know, like, no pressure. It was like, let's just show up and do it. And it doesn't matter. Yeah, it's insane to think about. I don't know. All right, I'll kind of get us back on track with Ferrari. Let's talk about their headquarters a little bit. They were originally in Modena from their pre-war stint, founded in 1943, and until 1943. So originally in Modena from their pre-war until 1943, which is when they moved to Maranello, which is where they are currently based, which it's just south of Milan, maybe about an hour by train. And they own and operate a track at the Fiorano circuit, which was built in 1972, which is both a road car and race car testing. And in addition, they're not too crazy far from Monza. I'm not sure if they ever frequent testing there. I'm sure they do. I'm not sure what the frequency is, but they would be about 2 hours from Monza as well, that they could use that track in addition.
Today, Ferrari are on a mission to be back on top as the dominant force that fans expect them to be. I think we've all come to expect Mercedes as the dominant force, but right underneath that is this kind of expectation that Ferrari should be up there as well. And even though everyone has that assumption, that belief that Ferrari is and should rightfully be up there, they've had some periods without some shining success. It's a nice little reminder that their current, I guess not current anymore, like the slump they've just kind of hopefully are on the path out of, the like track upwards, isn't their only time that they've struggled. In all of my reading about Ferrari, it is often easily glossed over, these little rough patches. They just conveniently skip over them. You know, there's just a massive jump in time in the articles or in the literature. But you know, sometimes the rough patches need to be celebrated. And everything that you hear Charles and really even Carlos Sainz and Bonato talking about now is that, you know, where they are now would not have happened without the last couple of years. So sometimes it's okay to to celebrate a little bit of failure. I don't really know if Toto Wolff feels like that right now, but whatever. So until Bahrain of this year, where we saw Charles Leclerc take his podium #1 win to start the season, Ferrari was winless for 45 races. It was actually their second longest winless streak in their history. The longest was 59 races, and that went from Spain of 1990 to Germany of 1994. And let me tell you, 91, 92, 93, they were rough years. I mean, like, Ferrari never won a race in those years. They never started from pole. They literally weren't even on the front row in 92 and 93.
It's just insane to me to think that the powerhouse that is Ferrari struggled. And I feel like when they struggle for a chunk of time.
Yeah. I think it's like a little cyclical thing. Those were their only rough patches. 94 was clearly a good year for them. But 1973 was another rough year.
That's the year Megan was born, if anyone was confused about that.
1973 was another rough year where they mustered just 8 top 10 starts between the two drivers. They had no podiums, no wins, no fastest laps, and no pole positions. They ended up P6 with only 12 points, which is pretty mind-blowing considering they were P6 in 2020, but had like 138 points. So that was before the point system changed. So my brain really struggled to wrap my head around that.
Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
No, and then I was going to say, but really, truthfully, the worst in their history, from my perspective, is 1980. I love how we're just like, let's talk about how great Ferrari is. Let's talk about how bad they were, too. In 1980, it was their actual worst year. They had 8 points, no wins, no podiums, no poles, no fastest laps, and no front row starts.
Yeah, to me, like, talking about this and talking about their failures instead of talking about all of their successes, it's so hard to believe when you think about their history in totality that they could ever be struggling like this. Our definition of Ferrari struggling was 2020, 2021 with Sebastian Vettel and Charles, which, like, retirements, car issues, the engine clearly wasn't there. It was insanely hard to watch. Insanely hard to watch. I mean, there were no wins. We had about 3 podiums, I believe, and they ended 6th in the standings. And so to see them where they are now is very exciting to me.
Makes me hopeful. I'm not convinced. I'm trying to temper my excitement a touch.
Just a touch. You're not diving into the deep red.
I mean, I'm full in. I'm full in on celebrating all of their successes, but I'm like 82% sure that this is gonna be a thing, but I don't want to get my hopes up.
I feel like 82% is a good place to be with Ferrari.
Hey, I'm hopeful. Which I think it actually takes us to the main segment, or the main chunk of what we're going to talk about today. But is 2022 the year that Ferrari is back? Like, is this the time?
My gut says yes. I feel like I'm maybe at 91% that they're back. I think this is a dream pairing of two drivers that one has true consistency and one has this incredible driving skill that we're seeing again for the first time in 2 full years, 3 full years, 2 full years. So I'm excited. I'm thrilled to see the rest of the season and if they can really maintain the development war.
My heart says I'm 82% certain, and then my head says, but we've got to watch out for Mercedes and Red Bull. I think the development game is going to be the biggest game. And that's really where they lost out. Truthfully. If you look back to like the hybrid era, 2017 and 2019, they were challenging Mercedes for the title, but it was very clear that they lost ground when it came to development. Like, they were there, but they didn't have the final push that Mercedes did. And so ultimately they would just come second. And that is my greatest fear, is that they look really strong right now. But this year, with new cars, it's going to be, and a budget cap, it's going to be very important to be strategic about when and where you're spending your money and when and where you're using you're bringing massive upgrades. So, like I said, my heart says I'm 82% sure, but my head says Toto Wolff and Christian Horner are not going to let this happen.
Yeah. I think with Ferrari, my biggest fear with Charles specifically is that he loses this Charles 2.0, which I'm going to talk a little bit about more later, style and confidence, and we see the confidence go down. And I'm not going to bring, I guess I'm going to bring it up and say, like, I'm kind of over the whole, like, Leclerc did, he put it in the wall. At some point, they all put it in the wall. It just so happens that we like to maybe pick on Charles a little bit more than we should. So yeah, that's definitely one of my fears of this season, is that he loses this new glimmer that he has found.
See, I think I'm less concerned about that. I'm more concerned about the car. I'm more concerned that the car, not that the car isn't great right now. It looks really strong right now. But it is all a chess match now. I think if Charles can keep his head on straight and not Leclerc it, which, I'm sorry, it's funny. Homeboy
funny.
Literally loves to just
not as much as Latifi, but
no, not as much as Latifi. Latifi likes to do it in race. Charles likes to do it like
in qualies
or practice. But no, I think that we're in a better place. Well, Ferrari is in a better place. I mean, 2020 was the struggle. It was the struggle year. 2021 was the transition year. They brought on Carlos Sainz, which was, I'm going to argue, was a great play, not only for Carlos Sainz to pull the escape hatch on McLaren, sorry, Danny Rick, but also it was a great pickup by Ferrari. I think Carlos Sainz is the perfect teammate to a Charles Leclerc, and he proved that last year. I mean, Carlos Sainz outscored the golden boy, Charles Leclerc. I mean, and no one saw that coming. I hate to admit it. No one saw that coming. Leclerc, yes, he had one podium at Silverstone. He was 2 laps away from victory ahead of Lewis Hamilton. Lewis Hamilton snatched that victory. He had 2 poles. It was Monaco and Baku. We all know what happened at Monaco. Baku, there was reliability issues. In comes Carlos Sainz. He podiums in Monaco. He podiums in Hungary. He podiums in Russia. And he had podiums in Baku as well. Those are not in a correct order. Wow. Really awful order. I just threw up there. It wasn't Baku that he podiumed in. It was Abu Dhabi. Right?
Yes.
Yes. That's why
Yep.
it's in a weird order in my head. Okay.
Yeah.
Brain glitch.
I just fact checked us too.
But no, I think that's where Charles sometimes gets a little too wild, or has gotten a little too wild, has maybe been a little too aggressive when he didn't need to be. Carlos Sainz is the cool head. I'm not saying that he's not an aggressive driver. He's not tenacious. He doesn't have the I'm gonna go for the gap. But I think where Charles sometimes hasn't in the past been able to like pull back, Carlos can. No, and then I think 2021, that car was a transition car. It was the transition car. They have made it very clear. They stopped all upgrades after Baku. They stopped all development on that car and went full head on into 2022, which was genius. But also they were in the perfect position to do that. Red Bull, Mercedes, they couldn't do that. McLaren couldn't do that. Ferrari could.
Yeah, they were graced by the F1 gods of timing, where just like Haas, who held all of their development for 2022, Ferrari could do the exact same and not necessarily disappoint anyone because there was that promise of 2022, we've got it in the bag, and they've showed up the first two races and proven to us that they made the right decision.
They were also strategic about it last year. They were honest about it last year. They knew they weren't in a top 2 car. They were like, look, we're going to let the top 4 guys duke it out, and we're just going to sit here and be intelligent about development. You know, they brought the new hybrid power unit. I think it was Charles took it in Russia. Sainz took it in Turkey. That showed great performance. That transition was focused on energy storage, batteries to get them up to being at the same level that their rivals were up, or in line with where, you know, Red Bull and Mercedes had been on terms of energy density. They played it really well last year. Asterisk is what I'm going to put right here. Can they continue that? Like that is the question. And that's going to be the game of 2022 is who can win the development game, because that is all this year is about.
Yeah, it's who can take the budget cap, the extra time that is allotted for wind tunnels, the new regulations, the new experiments with the side pods, and really make a championship winning car. Because at this point, if you fall even a little bit, you'll fall hard this year.
Yeah. Which I think is very smart about, like, Bonato. He just had an interview. I was just reading it, following along with the interview, listening. I wasn't listening, I was reading it. But basically he was like, we are in a much better spot this year because we've improved all of our like wind tunnel technologies, our simulations. We have been playing it. We've been focusing on improving our internal processes, but also we're watching the budget. Like, we are not bringing improvements or upgrades to Australia. They didn't bring upgrades between Barcelona and Bahrain. They're being very, very, very strategic about when they're going to bring upgrades. And they're waiting to fully understand the car, which is something that Gunther Steiner has said. Like, we're not going to upgrade for the sake of upgrading. We're going to wait until we have something that is actually going to give performance. So it kind of feels weird to compare those two.
They are somewhat the most similar, with, again, halting all 2021 upgrades and focusing on 2022. And now they are playing the long game, the patient game, the let's sit and wait. And I think what's huge for Ferrari this year in comparison to last year as well, Ferrari's on the front foot this year. They are in the lead. They are leading the drivers and the constructors championship. And if, again, the consistency is able to continue, it's going to be very difficult for the other teams to gain back the first two races. And I think this year, Megan, you've talked about it. You had that wild, dirty take that everyone's going to score points this year. I'm with you on that. And I think if you make mistakes this year in more than two races, it's going to come down to the wire of make or break.
I think it's going to be closer. It's going to be a lot closer this year. And I think the big thing is going to be, do you develop correctly and do you use your upgrades at the right time? Like, we know that Mercedes is going to be bringing a host of developments over the next couple of races leading up to Barcelona. It seems like Red Bull is going to be, from what they've indicated, they're going to be bringing some improvements or upgrades over the next couple of races. You know, is that the right play? Is the right play to better understand the car before you make changes? Or do they think that they fully understand the car? It's interesting that Red Bull and Mercedes seem to think that they fully understand their car enough to upgrade it, where Ferrari's like, hey, we're going to sit back. We're going to watch. We're going to see what happens. And, you know, maybe that is something that that is translatable and that they have learned from that 2020 slump. It's smarter to just change the process and wait a touch. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not inside of those Ferrari strategy meetings, but I think the long game here, especially with the budget, is going to be fascinating to watch. Okay, before we get into the drivers, I think we have to kind of tackle this because we've mentioned both Red Bull and Mercedes. So, like, why is everyone, or what feels like everyone, like, patiently waiting for the return of Ferrari dominance when literally everyone, or seemingly everyone, is so done with Mercedes dominance? Like, what's the difference between the two? And, like, why is it okay that Ferrari can dominate, but, like, oh, God forbid, Toto and Mercedes?
I think it's not so much that Mercedes has been able to dominate and has been dominating. It's the fact that most previous dominations have lasted 4 to 6 years instead of 6 to 8 years. And so there's this point in time of we're tired and bored of seeing Mercedes dominate, and we're ready to see another powerhouse. And who better than the all-time powerhouse of Ferrari?
But, like, okay, so it's 2 years longer. Okay. People are bored.
2 years longer.
2 years longer. So we go back to an old powerhouse? We don't find a new powerhouse?
I mean, would you rather see Red Bull or would you rather see Ferrari dominate?
I don't know. Give me McLaren.
Okay, well, I don't think they're ready yet.
But you know what I'm saying? Like, why is there so much? I think there's, like, a different level of, like, animosity towards Mercedes, which, if someone knows this, like, were people fucking tired of Ferrari and Michael Schumacher? Like, because it doesn't seem like that. But were they?
I don't know. I wish I knew the answer to that, to, like, have further discussion on if the times were similar. If it was me, I think I would have gotten tired of seeing Michael Schumacher dominate. But also, that was the first one who had done it for 7 years. And now it's like, Lewis Hamilton, we know it's possible. We want to see that 8th. We do. But I also want to see other people dominate. I want to see the talent of the other drivers really shine and show. And we're getting a taste of that this year. Like, I've told Megan, like, I've been geeking about Charles. and Carlos. I've been geeking about Ferrari in general, but I don't know. Maybe it's the other side of it too. Is maybe it's the fan base.
I just like don't get it. Like everyone thinks they're just like this evil Mercedes empire, and I'm like, but like if you don't like one team dominating, then like that, I don't know. Is it tied to the fact that like Ferrari is supposed to be dominating? Like, is that intrinsic in the sport that like Ferrari should be leading the pack, and so it's an expectation? It's not something that's a byproduct of what has happened that people are now like, oh, this is weird. We don't really know if we like this. But it just seems weird that one domination is accepted and another domination is like condemned.
Yeah. I'm with you on why it's weird. I just think there's a lot more history with Ferrari. And there's a lot more expected greatness. I think this Mercedes expected greatness is new, and they are somewhat of a newer team in successful Formula One teams. I mean, 7 years is a long time, but that's also just one era. 2 eras, I guess I should say. So, I don't know. It's intriguing. I'd be interested to see what other people have to think about this as well. Maybe we'll put something up on the story for people to answer, to give us some feedback on this.
Yeah, give us their thoughts on which empire they'd prefer rule them all. It literally is like
we'll
that.
come out with McLaren. You and I will start our little McLaren domination empire.
Zach Brown, you want to hire me? I'll be in charge of the Papaya Nation. I will help run the Papaya Empire. I swear all we do on here is like solicit jobs for people.
All we do is solicit jobs. All we do.
Let's talk about the drivers.
Yeah, let me jump into... I'll jump into Charles. So, self-critical man. He is a self-critical man that also has great sportsmanship. And I think that's one of the shining lights about Charles and what I so appreciate about him as a driver, which is why Megan and I kind of picked between the two drivers of who was going to do a deep dive on which one. And I wanted to learn more about Charles and how he basically deserved, or how he got to the point where he was awarded that super long 5-year contract in 2019 to continue with Ferrari. So if we look back, way back to 2005, I believe I was in 2nd grade. That's when Charles started officially karting, but he had been in his first race car at 3.5, or his first karting at 3.5. And then from 2009 to 2013, he was crowned champion of his main karting league every year. So early on, he showed dominance and speed. He just came out and was one of the fastest drivers on the track, simply put. And then he spent only 1 year in each formula class, which is very rare, and not a lot of drivers tackle that. Only, the greats we've seen do that. So in 2016, he took the GP3 championship, which was what F3 was called before it turned into F3. And to kind of put it into timeline for you, he beat out Alex Albon for that win. He had 25 points on him, so it was a decent year scrapping for that win. And he also joined the Ferrari Driver Academy that year. So Charles talks a lot about how growing up he always dreamed of being an F1 driver, but specifically a Ferrari F1 driver. His godfather, Jules Bianchi, was going to drive for Ferrari, and unfortunately passed away before he got his chance. And so Charles has often quoted his dream of being at Ferrari as filling Jules's place and kind of taking over the mantle of their relationship. In 2017, he took 7 consecutive pole positions in F2 and finished 72 points ahead, claiming the championship to become the youngest ever championship of a main support series in F1 at 19 years and 356 days. So just early on has shown that consistency and that fast and that speed, I should say, in qualies that we still see today. And then in 2008, he signed with Sauber F1, which is now Alfa Romeo. So he made his F1 debut, which marked the first time a driver from Monaco rejoined Formula One since 1994 with Oliver Beretta. And in 2019 is when he made the switch over to Ferrari. He took 10 podium finishes, 2 wins, 4 fastest laps, and the most pole positions with 7. He was actually the first non-Mercedes driver to be awarded pole position because that is a newer award in F1. And then in 2020, he finished 8th. And in both 2019 and 2020, he finished ahead of Sebastian Vettel, which he was the first man to outscore Vettel over a season in a Ferrari and did it 2 years in a row, which I feel like is saying a lot for having a teammate as a 4-time world champion. And then this year alone, I think, and maybe I've been harping on this a little bit too much, but I truly believe that Charles deserves to be seen among the greats of this, of who we see on the grid this year. I think he is in that higher echelon of drivers. He just has not had the car to prove that to us in the past 2 years. And that's why I'm so excited about it, is because we are seeing this Charles 2.0. We're seeing the driver that he's always been, but have never really had the opportunity to see in Formula One. We only saw it in the support series. So he was recently dubbed as Charles 2.0 by Ferrari ambassador Mark Jean. And Mark Jean went on to say that he's completely changed his mindset and mentality. He's more mature. He's more emotionally stable in the sense of, when things go wrong, also when things go right, having that balanced sportsmanship. And one thing that really stuck out to me about that article was that he said that Charles is more aware that this is a very long championship. And I've been kind of ruminating on that a little bit with Charles's history. And I feel like this new mindset of it's not just 16 races or it's not just however many races, it's 23 and I've got to show up to every single one and perform the best I can. And I feel like that has helped him overcome the lack of confidence that we have maybe seen in Charles as well these past couple of years with, maybe pushing too hard, going into the walls, etc. And then I wanted to include this before you started talking about Carlos, but Charles stated that Carlos is incredible and the best thing about him is the way he works. How Carlos is super consistent and knows how to really build up a weekend, which I thought was great. I listened to the Beyond the Grid episode, both of them with Charles, and he really talked about how his teammates have been different compared to Vettel and Carlos, but with Carlos's consistency, he really sees a great partnership forming.
I think that's like the big difference is that Carlos and Charles are the partnership that Ferrari wanted Vettel and Charles to be. Not really so much in terms of driver style or personalities or age, one being the mentor, one being the young, rookie entering the sport, but I think more in terms of the partnership in being, a good complement to one another. And I'm not saying that, Vettel and Charles weren't friends, but I think that there is definitely a different level of partnership that exists now. just in like how they interact, like you watching them and how they interact, but also the fact that they like play chess on the planes, they play poker, they play paddle.
Yeah.
The fact that Carlos is coming from a background of being on, he was on Toro Rosso, then he was on Renault, then he was on McLaren, and now he's on Ferrari. Like they've had very different paths, where Charles has been, he was in the Ferrari Drivers Academy and then went straight to Ferrari. They've had different Formula One experiences, but both of those have been good. Like Charles could bring the I know Ferrari assistance to Carlos, where Carlos could say like, here's what I've learned, elsewhere. So it's a good complement to one another. I also think that, Carlos Sainz, while he is Spanish, and so, like whatever, the like common thought or knowledge that, like Latin people are very like passionate, but not so much passion. Well, he's passionate about like F1. He's very passionate about paddle, which is this game, the Spanish game that's like apparently much easier than tennis because you can use the balls. So it sounds like something I could be into. Because I suck at tennis.
I have a good friend who plays paddle, and I think we should give it a try after hearing that it's easier than tennis.
I'm so into trying. But he's like has a very calm temperament, which is interesting because, most, stereotypical like Latin temperaments are kind of, big and, boisterous and are not calm. I'm going to go with not calm. And he is calm on and off the track. And I think that is a good balance to bring to the team. And I'm very excited. I'm really excited for this partnership.
Yeah, I believe that they are in the same season of life in terms of Formula One. With Vettel, again, you had the older champion who shows up, and with Carlos and Charles, they're in the same season. They've been in Formula One enough that they're comfortable with it. They're clearly not rookies. They're clearly have settled. And they're both harnessing their skills this season, and they are both helping each other in this new light that is much more so of a duality in a teammate than I've seen with Charles and anyone else, and probably with Carlos and anyone else as well. Bless you, by the way.
Oh my gosh, that would really hurt. No, I mean, I think it's cool. I also think that it's really cool that they're like BFFs, but Carlos and Lando are still BFFs. I don't know. I think it's cool. Okay, let me talk a little bit about Carlos Sainz Jr. because I'm actually going to full out straight admit that when I watched season 1 of Drive to Survive, I kind of fucking hated him. I thought he was like not a storyline that I was interested in. He wasn't a driver that I was like super wanting to watch and learn more about. Not saying I didn't root for him, because I kind of root for everybody on the grid. Everyone knows that, except for Nikita Mazepin, but he's not on the grid anymore, so that doesn't matter. But no, Carlos Sainz was one of those guys that, when I first started watching F1, I was like, oh, there's Sainz. Moving on. Now I'm like a huge Carlos Sainz fan. Like, full stop. I am like, let's see it. In fact, I would argue that I love Charles and I want him to succeed, but I really want Carlos Sainz to win a couple of races. And I think this is going to be the year. I'm convinced it's going to be the year. I'm convinced he's going to have multiple this year. But over the last couple of years, I don't know if it's been McLaren. I don't know if it's been Ferrari. I think it was McLaren that kind of brought him out of his shell. I listened to the Beyond the Grid about Carlos Sainz, and one of my favorite things, I wrote it down. Let me find it real quick. But basically, he said that I achieved the best version of myself at McLaren. And he basically attributes to his now success at Ferrari to his time at McLaren. And I loved that, because I think a lot of the talk lately has been, oh, he made the right career move doing the like ripcord on McLaren. And I agree. I'm going to talk about how I think Carlos Sainz is a genius in making moves. But I do think that it's amazing that he recognizes how much he learned at McLaren. And it is clear he learned a lot. So let's talk about him. He is, like I've said before, he is like a calm temperament on and off the track, but he is intelligent, instinctive, and calm on track. He makes the right moves at the right time, and it is natural. It is normal to him. Probably has something to do with the fact that, you know, he comes from a racing family. He's the son of two-time World Rally champion Carlos Sainz Sr., and he's the nephew of rally driver Antonio Sainz. So he does come from a family of racing, specifically rallying, which is much different from Formula One. But if you're around racing, it instills some certain things in you, I think. That set you apart. So let's talk about his specific Formula One experience. I'm going to pass everything up. I know Katie did a deep dive of it, but I really want to talk about the fact that Carlos Sainz came to Formula One in 2015. He was part of Scuderia Toro Rosso. He was a tenacious racer, and he was teammates with Max Verstappen, which I think people don't talk about enough. And this is my point about him. Carlos Sainz is a fucking star. He is a star now, but he has been under the radar since the beginning. He really, truthfully, has not found this presence on the grid until he came to McLaren. So he was at Toro Rosso from 2015 to 2016. And then in 2017, I'm going to get these years wrong because they all kind of jumble in my brain. Yes, it was 2017. So in 2017, it was clear that Red Bull was not going to promote him. It was very evident that it was going to be the Max Verstappen ride. And at that point, it was Max and Daniel, and that was going to be what it was. He was going to be at Toro Rosso. He would sign a contract with Renault in 2017. The plan was for him to join Renault in 2018, but they actually ended up calling him to replace Julian Palmer for the final 4 rounds of the 2017 season. So he would replace Palmer before the US Grand Prix of 2017. Ending his time at Scuderia Toro Rosso, he would then finish out those 4 races with Renault and then go on to do a 1-year stint in 2018 with Renault. It's so crazy to me that he only did 1 year with Renault because it felt so much longer, but it was only 1 year. The next year, he would get the call. He would sign a contract to join McLaren, where he would be teammates with Lando Norris. He would get his first podium at the Brazilian Grand Prix I'm going to get this year wrong too, so I'm going to double check myself, in 2019. And then in 2020, he outperformed Lando Norris, who was a much younger rookie, who was definitely that younger star power. And I think that performance, I mean, truthfully, we know that Ferrari had kind of been following him. We now know that the deal with Ferrari was done in like the beginning of COVID. I mean, he was talking about the fact that he was signing the deal at the beginning stages of lockdown. But I think it is very clear that in 2020, his ability to like outperform the young gun, the like star power of Lando Norris really is what showcase his ability in a car, and which also showed that he was going to be able to come to Ferrari and bring the fight to Charles Leclerc. I'm going to just leave it there. So let's talk about Ferrari. Last year, we already kind of talked about it a little bit. He outperformed his teammate Charles Leclerc, which again, part of that transition and these multiple transitions between teams from Scuderia Toro Rosso to Renault, Renault to McLaren, McLaren to Ferrari, his ability to hop, his ability to transition between those cars was pretty amazing when you think about the fact that he was only with like Renault for 1 year, McLaren with 2, and then in his first year with Ferrari, it took him a second to settle in. He settled into the car, But by the end of the season, he had outperformed Charles, who did have a struggle of a year. They were at the disadvantage with the engine. But he brought the fight. He was showing up and right time, right place, strong driver, tenacious driver. And he was showing that, like, he deserved that Ferrari spot. 2022. Going into the year, we see that he gets the P2 in Saudi, he gets the P3 in Bahrain. But I think that his ability to be so successful in this car is because he has transitioned between cars before. It was easier for him. I'm not saying it wasn't, hard or difficult, but I'm saying that his previous jumping between constructors did allow him to, fit into this new 2022 car and be able to make some changes. I'm not saying it wasn't hard. I'm not saying he has it totally figured out. He has made it very clear that Saudi was his most difficult race, and he was P3. He was P3. I have this switched. Whatever, in my brain. So the fact that he said that Saudi, where he was third, was his most difficult race, but he was like starting to get a better feeling in the car, to me, that's just a massive indicator of what is still to come. And the fact that he's still learning, once he becomes comfortable in that car, I think he's really going to bring the fight to, he's going to be, it won't just be Charles and Max, it'll be Carlos, Charles, and Max fighting. And that is what I'm most excited about. He's just very fascinating to me because he has made all of these smart career moves, which I have to attribute partially to his business manager, who I also thought was kind of weird when I watched Drive to Survive. But no, he's like left teams. He's been very astute of when he needs to move on. And I think that all ties back to like the fact that he is very calm and he is very intelligent and he is very strategic and he is very aware of what's going on around him. And that is just all the more reason why once he knows this car, he will be unstoppable.
That was incredible. Nice job. I mean, I learned a lot about him, and I feel like you're exactly right in the fact that he thinks before he acts, and he knows what's going on. And not a lot of F1 drivers think before they act all the time.
Correct. I also want to attribute a lot of him and Charles's strategy to the fact that they've been playing chess.
Yeah.
They're playing chess and they're playing poker.
And Charles plays the piano and Carlos golfs. So
I did think it was really cute when Charles was like, I'm not golfing with Carlos. He's way too good.
Okay, Megan, so why be a fangirl?
I'm so glad we started with Ferrari because they are one of the easiest teams to root for. And I think my first point is that they come with a legacy. They are Formula One. I mean, they really are the other F word in motorsport. It's Formula One Ferrari. That's it. They go together like peanut butter and jelly in my brain. Like, you cannot have one without the other. And I don't actually think there will ever be a day when there isn't one without the other. And so I think for new fans, I think for young fans, I think when you're trying to figure out who you want to root for, it's really kind of easy, and not in a bad way. I say the term easy, but natural to say I root for Ferrari because they are F1. And to me, that's completely valid. And by the way, their legacy is like an amazing one.
It's incredible. I'm quickly looking up. I don't know if I'm going to be able to find the number before it's time, but one of the points I want to make is their fan base is incredibly large. They are all over the world, and they even have their own name, which is the Tafasi. And when you're in Italy and you're wearing something Ferrari, it is like being in the US and wearing I don't want to say a Tom Brady jersey, but
Oh
that's
no,
the
he's
first
too
one that came to
controversial.
mind. Too controversial. I could pick someone else, but it is truly a part of who they are, not only as citizens of Italy, but as people who appreciate the legacy and the history that is F1 and is Ferrari. So by being a Ferrari fan, you get to be a part of one of the largest, if not the largest fan base of Formula One.
I don't know if there's anything that is actually comparable to the Tifosi. Like now, when you just mentioned like being in the US, like I don't think we have anything full stop that is comparable.
Yeah, we have too many teams.
But I would argue that I don't think there might not be anything comparable in the world.
I would agree. I mean,
Like,
it's a global fan base.
There's nothing that rivals them.
No, the feeling that you would have being in Monza with all of those people rooting for Ferrari would be insane to experience.
I feel like my heart would explode of just like pure happiness.
Just beating for Ferrari only.
Okay, so my second one is it's a double negative, but you cannot not be a fan of Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz Jr., which I know is kind of a dirty take from me because I literally just admitted that I didn't really want to be a fan of Carlos Sainz Jr. But now you cannot not be a fan.
Yeah.
I mean,
like they're just incredible people.
I just like them, and you can't not like them because they're like so amazing. Like they're just good people. I don't know them personally. Clearly, I don't know them. If I knew them, I'd be hanging out with them. But I desperately want to learn paddle and like one day play with them. And I mean, Charles plays the piano. They're funny as hell. I mean, Marie Carey is still one of my favorite things on the internet. Charles, even though you Leclerc it and you like to say things like, I am stupid. It was just a racing incident.
You're still the hottest driver on the grid.
I mean,
hands down.
Absent all of that, he's also just like kind of cool and makes amazing faces. And I think part of the reason I like both of them is because they have great facial expressions. They do very funny.
They are memes themselves. They literally just generate memes.
And I make a lot of funny faces, so I like that they make a lot of funny faces. I love that video of Lando Norris and Carlos with the bowl of milk. Like, I like them. They're funny.
I feel like they're also, like, up for anything.
I mean, Katie, he agreed to
I know, with the milk in the car and... Yeah.
If you haven't watched that video, you need to, because it is like, why did anyone agree to this? And also, did they just burn that car because there's no way they got the smell out? There's
no way they cleaned. That car was brought and detailed immediately after, and it still smells like milk, I bet.
Also, do they
Gross.
Did they give that to their worst enemy?
Okay, and lastly, why to be a fangirl? These boys are serving excellent battles, just absolutely incredible battles on track, sometimes off track. And we're seeing it with Charles and Max. And like Megan said, we cannot wait to see the Charles, Carlos, Max, and Sergio battles for the season to come. We might even get a little Lewis Hamilton, George Russell action in there. But it's going to be an incredible season watching the two of them develop this whole entire year.
I can't wait. I'm excited. I feel like we're just 2 races in, and I'm just so hyped for Australia. Which, speaking of, up next is the Australian Grand Prix in Melbourne, Australia. And I totally wrote in here at the Melbourne Grand Prix circuit. It's the Albert Park circuit. Well, is it still called Albert Park? It might be called the Melbourne Grand Prix circuit, actually.
I believe it's still Albert Park.
I don't know. We're going to have to look that up. Okay, Katie, look it up while I read. While I say words. The 58-lap race takes place on Sunday, April 10th for round 3 of the season. It kind of feels crazy that we're only at round 3. We missed the Australian Grand Prix the last 2 seasons in 2020 and 2021 due to the COVID-19 pandemic, but we are back. Danny Rick is going home, and he was on a horse, and we were ready for it. Well, I was unprepared for it, but now we're ready for it. This year, we head to Albert Park for a street circuit race, which will feature some new changes that they've been working on since we've been there. Turns have been widened. So the following turns, 1, 3, 6, 13, which will also feature a longer straight, and 15 have all been widened. Historically, Albert Park has been a difficult circuit to overtake, so some extra room at the apex should lead to more overtakes, and let me tell you, I'm pretty pumped to see if that happens, especially with these new cars, which are serving up some excellent battles. Turn 9 and 10, which had been a chicane, has now been deleted. I also love that, like, the terminology they say is like, we just deleted that chicane. You mean you removed it and remodeled it and redesigned it? Nope, deleted. Cool. Love that for you, Formula One. So that is now a much faster, complex. Finally, the pit lane has been widened and has a new speed limit, which is increased from 60 to 80 kilometers per hour. Overall, the goal in all of these redesigns was to create more overtaking opportunities, to create more competitive racing, and the layout should ultimately be faster with 2 fewer turns, which will give us some overall shorter lap times. I think they're saying it should be about 5 seconds shorter. I'm here for it. I'm excited for it. I'm interested in it. The track is also historically known for being very bumpy, as previously it was still the original tarmac from 1995. So it desperately needed to be resurfaced as it was partially public roads. Overall, we should see a much better drive this year and a much better experience for the drivers, which, thank God, is they're already having a bumpy ride with the porpoising. The first Grand Prix that was held at Albert Park was in 1996. Before that, it was held in Adelaide from 1985 to 1995. The last 5 winners, we've seen a battle between Mercedes and Ferrari for supremacy. 3 wins for Mercedes, 2019 with Valtteri Bottas, 2016 for Nico Rosberg, and 2015 for Lewis Hamilton. We have 2 for Ferrari. 2018 and 2017 went to Sebastian Vettel. I am going to hands down bet that this year will be a battle between Red Bull and Ferrari, and I'm going to go with Ferrari will be triumphant. So, Katie, what's the official name of it?
It is the Melbourne Grand Prix circuit.
Whoop, whoop. I'm not crazy. I think it's the Melbourne Grand Prix circuit at Albert Park or something
Correct.
like that.
Correct.
So join us next week for our race recap, and we'll be serving up lots of Danny Rick conversations, so make sure you're there. Thank you so much for listening to another episode. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us at Dirty Driving Pod on Twitter and Instagram.
Until next time, stay dirty.